And now it's time for another edition of Phillies Talk Podcast. Hello and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk. It's the Phillies Talk Podcast. A little funkiness coming in on that music there that I got off of the YouTube audio library called Standing Here. Nice little way to bring in the show here on the last day of October. It's October 31st, 2016. Of course, we're in the middle of the World Series, almost towards the end now. Going on to Game 6 is the Chicago Cubs, who forced a sixth game to be played in Cleveland against the Cleveland Indians. And, of course, the Indians could have put that game away last night in Chicago at Wrigley Field, but the Cubbies held on to that game 3-2 to force this sixth game of the series. I hope everyone out there is enjoying the World Series. I know I am. If you look around the baseball diamond, especially on the Indians, you're going to see a lot of former Phillies. And Mini Mart is one of them. Martinez, I was very surprised to even know he was on the Indians. I don't follow the American League too much, but I was very curious to see him involved with the World Series. And, of course, Terry Francona, who used to manage the Phillies, now with the Indians, and, of course, won the World Series with the Red Sox. So it's always great to look back and see some of the old players and managers that may have been through the Phillies organization, and now they're with other teams doing well. Always good to see that. And it's always great to root them on, even though I'm rooting for the Cubs in the World Series this year. But I hope everyone is enjoying it. I wanted to get a podcast in before the end of the month here of October. I've been sort of dragging my feet to getting a Phillies podcast done. And I just had to put my nose to the grindstone and start doing the shows. It's, of course, a little bit difficult for me, as you know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time. My longtime podcast co-host and good friend, Jimmy Mulry, passed away earlier in the year. And it's really tough to get together to do a podcast for me. I just... every time I think about the show, I start thinking about Jim, and it kind of a little depressing. I just can't bring myself to doing the show like I used to. And but of course, the shows are all done for his memory, and hopefully he's looking down and watching this all, because I know at the beginning of the season, Jimmy had some predictions that we did for our prediction show, and I'm going to play a little bit of that in a second. Some of the teams that we picked, and I think you're going to be a little surprised, especially if you haven't heard the podcast before, or maybe you just listened to it the last time, or maybe a couple editions of the show. But every year, Jimmy and I did a prediction show, of course, as most podcasters do before the season kicks off, but I really think this show is going to be pretty interesting to review. I seem to remember Jimmy picking the Cleveland Indians to go to the World Series, so I'm still a little fuzzy with the memory of it, and I haven't played it back yet. I'll be playing it the same time you guys are listening to it here on the podcast in just a second. So I'm going to review that. And also during this show, I'm going to talk about the Phillies, the end of the season, the last month or two of the season, stuff that I didn't cover before the last show and last podcast. I know it's a little late to be covering it now, but it's never too late to talk about the end of the Phillies season. And, of course, the upcoming events, what's happening with the team currently. I'll be talking about that as well. But before we get too much further into the show, let's review some of the picks that Jim and I made earlier in the season this year. And I'm going to play an audio clip. And like I said, I haven't heard this probably since the time we recorded it. So it'll be the first time for me hearing it too. And I'll give you some reactions right after this clip plays. So here it is, our predictions from earlier this year. We'd love to do that. Jimmy, it's about time for our 2016 MLB picks. And I think we'll go with the National League first. And why don't you start out with your picks for the National League with the East?
Well, I wrote them down the way I think they'll finish. In the East, I got Washington winning the East. Then the Mets, Atlanta, Miami, and the Phils. In the Central, I got St. Louis, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Milwaukee. In the West, I got San Fran, Arizona, LA, San Diego, Colorado. My surprise team is going to be the Diamondbacks, I think.
Diamondbacks. Okay, save that surprise team. We're just doing the NL East, but you have surprising to me. You have the Nationals beating the Mets for the division crown in the NL East.
Well, I think the Nationals underachieved last year.
Yeah.
And I think they got Dusty Baker as a manager, and he's worth a few wins. But I just think it's their year.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know 90% of the sites out there have the Mets repeating as a National League Championship team, actually, and even the NL East winner. But interesting that you picked the Nationals, being that the Mets are coming back completely, almost the same as they left last season. Very interesting pick there. So over in the Central, who is your team for the Central? The St. Louis Cardinals. Okay. Now that's interesting as well. The Cards are, sort of their stock is dropping a little bit, and
they got pitching though.
Yeah, they still have pitching. How about the Cubs?
Cubbies, I picked them as a wild card team.
Okay, so
they're my wild card team. One of my wild. And in the West, I got to go with the Giants. It's the even year. They win it every even year. The Giants win the West. But I'm picking the other wild card.
Not the wild card first. We'll save that for a little later. Right. But the Giants, let's get back to that. It's going to be an interesting division over there in the NL West. You got the Giants, the Dodgers, and the Diamondbacks. These new-look Diamondbacks are going to be an issue.
I think Arizona's going to beat the Dodgers out for second place. I think with Mr. Greinke there, they've really bolstered their pitching staff. Whether they can, Goldschmidt is their best hitter, but we'll see what happens. Yes, I think they're the other wild card team.
Yes, we will. 2016 is going to be interesting out there in the West. Now, let's go with your NL wild cards. I know you gave it away a little bit, but who do you have as your
Cubs and the Diamondbacks?
Cubbies and the Diamondbacks. I'm writing this down as I'm doing the show here. So those are good, solid picks as far as teams that I think are going to make it into the playoffs in some manner. But yeah, I do see the Cubs doing well. And obviously the Diamondbacks look like they're going to be on fire to me. So let's go over to my picks for the National League. In the East, I have the Mets winning pretty handily. Second place, I kind of see the Nationals finishing second. But going forward, third and fourth place is going to be interesting. I wonder if the Miami Marlins and the Phillies might do a tango to finish third or fourth. I don't have them finishing higher than fourth, the Phillies. But I think they're going to be improved this year.
Atlanta's going to be pretty bad this year, too.
Yeah, a lot of the forecasters out there have Atlanta finishing last in the NL East. But I see kind of the Nationals playing better than the Miami Marlins and both the Phillies. So I would have to say it would be Mets, Nationals, Phillies or Marlins. I would like to go with the Phillies, Marlins, and then the Braves. So going over to the NL Central, I've got the Cubs pulling away with the NL Central, putting the Cards away this year. I think they were on the verge of doing something great last year, and I think that was one of the teams that I picked for the World Series.
It was last year, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just that some of the guys on that team had a terrible playoff situation they just couldn't get out of their own way in the playoffs. Maybe they were starstruck at being to the big game, the big series, and they just couldn't get it done. The Bryants.
You believe in the jinx?
I don't believe in the jinx. No,
okay.
I think that with the personnel changes that the Cubs has made in the last couple years, they're building themselves to win in a big way, and I think they do that in the NL Central. I think they take that division. Out west, this is going to be a little surprise to you, and I changed my pick last night. I'm going with the Diamondbacks.
Okay. Not a bad pick.
Yeah, I did have the Giants finishing first, but I think the Diamondbacks are going to surprise everybody. The Giants sort of faded last year, and I don't see them. They did pick up Johnny Cueto, but I don't see them really benefiting all that much. Madison Bumgarner had his first start the other day. He got lit up. Not that that's going to happen a lot in the season, but I just don't see that magic of that even year is going to come back for the Giants this year.
Who's your surprise team?
Well, we'll get to our surprise teams. How about my wild cards now?
Yeah, your wild card.
The wild card teams will be the Giants and, believe it or not, the Nationals. So I've got two teams that I think are going to be in contention, but it'll depend how they play their seasons. They've kind of folded last year, both teams. The Nationals especially, they've been forecasted to do well. The last couple seasons just come up empty.
Well, they got a good manager, though.
Yeah, as you said, Dusty Baker's going to add a wild card to that team. He's going to give them a little more structure and experience to that team. Whether or not they rise to the occasion will be the issue. Now let's go with your surprise teams for the NL.
Well, National League was Arizona.
Okay.
Because they didn't do anything last year. But Arizona's going to surprise a lot of people this year.
Yes, they will. I think a lot of people are starting to jump on their bandwagon. My surprise team might surprise you a little bit. The Phillies in the National League. Worst to first? I don't think so. But look at the Red Sox. They finished the last 1 year. They came back and took them by storm the following year. And we'll talk about that more in the AL predictions that we have going on. But I like the Phillies for my surprise team. And, of course, another team that I've talked about in the last couple seasons has been the Pirates. So I'd have to go Phillies, Pirates, with two Pennsylvania teams being my surprise teams. So let's take a little break here in our podcast. We'll come back on the other side. A couple words from our great people over at BaseballTalkRadio.com. A whole lot of great baseball talk for you right there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we'll be coming back with our AL picks on Phillies Talk Podcast.
You're listening to BaseballPodcasts.net. Wouldn't it be great if you could get a PhD in life through baseball? Welcome to Baseball PhD, a tour company for your brain. 30 major league teams, 100 places to see. Let's touch them all as we make the road trip of a lifetime.
Hey, baseball fans, if you've been dying all winter for some hot baseball action, for the crack of the bat, the slap of a ball in a leather glove, waiting to talk baseball and listen to people talking baseball, well, you can have that and much more at BaseballPodcast.net, the home of great baseball podcasts. That's BaseballPodcast.net.
This is the Baron from the Phillies. Listen to Phillies Talk Podcast.
Hi, I'm Gary Mack from Mets Musings, and you're listening to Rich and Jim on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballPodcast.net, the home of baseball podcasts.
We're back live talking baseball with our 2016 MLB Pick Show. And Jimmy, we had a nice time with that NL pick. So why don't we do the same thing? Why don't you go with your American League picks, leave the wild cards off, and we'll talk a little bit about the teams.
AL East. I like the Blue Jays.
Okay.
They hit the ball.
Yes, they do. They have quite an offense.
And they got some decent pitching, so I got Boston second. I got the Yankees third, Baltimore, and then Tampa.
Okay.
Central, Kansas City, you got to go with them.
Mm-hmm.
The Chicago White Sox.
Uh-huh.
Cleveland, Detroit, and Minnesota.
Okay. Excellent picks there. I don't think we'll have a disagreement on Kansas City.
And then the West, I got Texas, Houston, California, Oakland, and Seattle.
All right, very good. I think a lot of people picked Texas. I don't know about them. They've come up lame for me the past couple years. Adding Cole Hamels is going to help them, obviously.
And Diekman
in the bullpen if he returns to the form that he was with the Phillies. But yeah, I do. I kind of like Texas, but I'm really not on their bandwagon yet. At least in my picks. So let's go over to my picks here for the AL. In the East, I like the Boston Red Sox to be a surprise, take that division. I think they're just going to work. They picked up David Price in the offseason. He's going to be good for 10, 12 wins, maybe even 15. And I just feel that it's going to be Boston's year. They're kind of dissatisfied with losing over there, to say it mildly. Over in the Central, of course, I'm going to agree with you, Jimmy. I like the KC Royals to do it again. And we'll talk a little bit later in the podcast about who we picked to go further into the playoffs. But out west, I'm going to have the Houston Astros as my pick in the AL West. And that's going to be a surprise if they come through. They were a young team last year. They got a little taste of getting places, but I think they're going to go even further this year. I kind of see them like a younger Cubs team of the AL. I just think they're going to do better things this year than myself. So, Jimmy, why don't you give us your AL wildcard teams?
Astros and Red Sox.
Very nice pick. So we're all over the Astros and the Red Sox to do some playoff activity. My AL wildcards are Toronto and Texas. It's going to be tough in the AL East. It's going to be a tough battle between the Red Sox, Yankees, and Toronto. I just don't think Toronto has the pitching this year. I do believe they have the offense, but can their bullpen and pitching hang in there? That's my question. And we'll see what the answer is, of course, starting up in a couple weeks. But let's go to the pennants. Jimmy, how about your NL pennant?
What about the surprise teams?
Okay, well, you want to do the surprise team?
The White Sox.
Go ahead. For the AL, the White Sox? Okay, very good.
They've improved themselves tremendously.
Yes, they have. I've got two surprise teams. Is that the only surprise team you have for?
Yeah, White Sox.
Okay. For the AL, my surprise team might not be that great of a surprise, but I think the Yankees are going to do better. And I also picked the LA Angels to do better. Both teams look like they're on the verge of doing something. Mm-hmm. They could be question marks as far as making the wild card even in my picks. But all right, let's move on to the NL pennant. Who do you have for the pennant?
To win a pennant?
Let's go with the two teams.
Cubs.
First. Okay, Cubs and
American League, Houston.
Okay, who do you have the Cubs playing for your
for the
pennant?
Washington.
Okay, very good. Washington and the Cubs, and you have Cubs going ahead on that. So very cool there. My picks for the NL pennant, believe it or not, are going to be the Diamondbacks and the Mets. The D-backs and the Mets. I have the Mets winning the NL, the whole enchilada again this year. I just think that they're a powerhouse team, It all came together for them last year. They made it to the World Series. They didn't win, but I kind of think 2016 might be a better year for them. It seems like some powerhouse teams do repeat, make it to the World Series. The next year, you can look at the 08 Phillies and the 09 Phillies for that. And I just think the Mets are going to go again this year. How about your AL pennant? Who are the two teams you had there?
Astros and Toronto.
Wow, that would be a nice mix.
And I'm picking the Houston Astros.
Okay, a young upstart ball club.
That'd be a nice World Series. Cubs Astros.
Yes, it would. It'd be a Midwest flavor there.
And they used to be National League rivals too.
Very good. So you have a Cubs Astros World Series. My team, or actually the teams I have for the AL pennant, are the Red Sox versus the Royals. That would be an exciting matchup, I think, at this point, with David Price being on the Red Sox. The Royals, of course, are an amazing team. But I have, believe it or not, I have a rematch of the World Series between the Mets and the Royals.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
It might be a long shot. Probably is a long shot.
Mine is a long shot, but I'm going with my heart this year. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it. You talk about underdog.
So there you have a review of the teams that we picked to do well in 2016. We hit on some good ones there. Missed a few. Every year, Jimmy seemed to have picked the Cleveland Indians in the past, and he had them as a surprise team this year, of course. But yeah, it's amazing to see how the Cleveland Indians pulled it all together. It seemed like that team really got going in August. In mid-August, they seemed to never look back and just take the rest of August and September right into October, and they stayed hot playing through the playoffs. So that's the recipe for a great team. You got to really start getting hot at a certain time and stay that way to make it through sometimes. So that was a look back at our 2016 picks, and now we're going to look a little bit into the future with the Phillies. Of course, today is October 31st, and that's a big day in Phillies history. Been reading on the web and all. It didn't seem like it, but 8 years ago on Halloween Day, there was a huge parade with approximately 2 million fans in attendance as it went down Broad Street and ended up down at Citizens Bank Park. I did not attend the parade. I just didn't want to take another day off of work. I had taken a couple days off here and there to see the playoffs and things like that. But, yeah, I did not see the parade. I enjoyed the pictures, though. They were very nice. And, wow, what a memory for those that were there at the parade. And if you listen to the podcast and you want to record something or write it down and send it in, I'd love to read it on an upcoming show about your trip to the Phillies parade. I know it's always a great thing to talk about and, go over, even now that it's 8 years ago. And, of course, just a few days prior to today, it was the 8th anniversary that the Phillies won the World Series in a delayed Game 5 that had to be postponed. Many of us know that that Game 5 started and ended up with some rain during the middle of it, and a couple innings had to be made up in a future game. So I know there was some very tough circumstances with tickets and things like that. People were selling their tickets and invalidating them. It's a valuable lesson a lot of people learned about tickets and World Series tickets in general. It can be a messy situation. Just because you're holding a ticket sometimes doesn't mean that you're going to get in anymore, because the ticket, of course, has to scan with the scanner at the gate now. So just merely having a ticket in hand just really doesn't even guarantee you entrance. Kind of a strange thing to go through for a lot of people, and especially at the 2008 Phillies World Series there. So a couple nice memories there, strolling down memory lane with the Phillies. And just, of course, a week ago prior, around the 25th, I believe it was the anniversary for the 1980 win of the Phillies in the World Series, and that's really going back some years. And, of course, a lot of those guys still show up at the annual Phillies reunion of the older players. Of course, Mike Schmidt, who does the broadcast now, being one of them. Pete Rose, very occasionally, will make an appearance with the Phillies. And, hey, you can even get some autographs together of those older players sometimes at different events. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. And we're going to take just a little break now. Come back, and on the other side, we're going to see what the Phillies can do in 2017 to make them better, and we're just going to go over a brief synopsis of the last month or 6 weeks of the season for the 2016 Phillies. We'll be back right after this message.
Hi, I'm Gary Mack from Mets Musings, and you're listening to Rich and Jim on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballPodcast.net, the home of baseball podcasts.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fighting Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at brewtownsports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack from Mets Musings, and you're listening to BaseballPodcast.net. You can hear my show and all the other baseball podcasts at BaseballPodcast.net, the home of great baseball talk shows.
And welcome back to Phillies Talk Podcast. We're looking back now at the 2016 season. And one of the nice spots that I like to read about the Phillies is on a site called baseball-reference.com. It's a site that was started by a local guy in the Philadelphia area. His name is Sean Foreman. And I'd like to have him on an upcoming Phillies Talk podcast. I'll have to give him a call and see if he can make it. But he runs an excellent site with all kinds of useful stats and information about baseball. He also has football, basketball, hockey, and Olympics on that different sites. It's called Sports Reference, a whole collection of different websites there on stats. Well, looking back at the 2016 Phillies using that website, the top producer by WAR, which is a acronym for wins above a replacement player, was Obadel Herrera. He had a 4.2 WAR on the season, and a surprise player ended up in second place for me as Jared Eichhoff, second on WAR for the Phillies in 2016. He's got a 3.4 rating, and in third, Cesar Hernandez. He really picked himself up. The rest of the season got going there. Ended up with a great batting average of 294. He almost made a 300 batting average on the season. And he did pretty well. I mean, his offensive production wasn't that great with 39 RBIs and 6 home runs. We're kind of used to more out of a player, but he got a lot of base hits for the Phillies over the year. But ending up in fourth spot here is Jeremy Hellickson, 3.1 WAR. And in fifth is Hector Neris, believe it or not, a reliever, really well for the Phillies this year at 2.0. And a guy who I thought might end up a little higher on this list, Vincent Velasquez, and he ended up at a 1.9 WAR for the Phillies. And next after him, Carlos Ruiz, 1.5 wins above replacement player. And, of course, he no longer is with the Phillies. The Phillies now have no remaining links to the 2008 World Series. I was going to say 1980. But, the last player gone from the Phillies as well. Mr. Ryan Howard, not extended for next year, no big surprise. And I haven't heard any teams yet that have made an offer to Howard. Usually most of the teams will do that after the World Series, although every now and again you'll see a different player being offered contract during such series, but not so in the case of Ryan Howard yet. Well, looking through the rest of the lineup for the Phillies, of course, Cameron Rupp, he'll probably be back next year for the Phillies. They'll still have this young kind of core that they've been talking about for the last couple of years. Tommy Joseph is going to anchor first base for the Phillies. You can almost bet on that. Joseph played in 107 games for the Phils, 47 RBIs, and a tremendous 21 home runs. So that's pretty decent. His batting average on the year was .257. As we talked about, Cesar Hernandez really came through with some nice base hits for the Phillies. He had the most, one of the highest totals of hits, 161. Obadel Herrera actually beat him out for the highest number of hits on the team at 167 on the year. Of course, Freddie Galvis at short. We may see him start the season with the Phillies, or Phillies may want to bring up the young star that they have waiting in the wings for that star to be, I guess you could say. But I think we'll see Freddie Galvis make it out of spring training in 2017 as your starting Phillies shortstop. Michael Franco, again, at third base. And the outfield was where the Phillies could use the most improvement. They could use two real good outfielders to replace what they had there. Of course, Peter Bourjos was taking turns with Tyler Goodell most of the season. We had Cody Ashe with 71 games last year. And Obadel Herrera, he had 159 games with the Phillies, played just about the whole season with the Phils, and most of it there in center field. But in the corners, I could say, is the best spot that the Phillies need help on. They need guys that are going to drive in runs and get hits. That's the big part. Be clutch, be able to get those big hits. Didn't even look at the available outfielders for 2017 yet, and there had been some rumors that the Angels might be shopping Mike Trout around. I think that's a very far-fetched rumor. But if you think about it, Trout would practically own Philadelphia if he came here. I think he would inspire some of these younger guys that are now younger than him to really pick up their game a little bit and devote themselves more to this game and see those fruits of that labor come through with better play. So it's just a pie-in-the-sky dream right now for a guy like a Mike Trout to be able to join the Phillies. But they need some spark out there in the outfield, and they need guys that are proven winners, guys that are going to deliver RBIs for you. I'm talking 100 or more. If you look at the totals for the Phillies and RBIs, no one's near 100 except for Michael Franco with 88. And when you get that kind of a team, you're not going to make the playoffs. You're not going to end up in second place. You're not going anywhere basically except home after the regular season. If you don't have guys that can knock in the runs, win ball games when it counts. So there's a brief look back at last season. I'm not going to dwell on how poorly it ended for the Phillies. The last couple of weeks, they didn't win many games. Not quite sure why. I think you're going to see the last year of the Pete Mackanin experience this year. He's had a shot to run this team. He's done fairly well with it. He doesn't have a bunch of all-star players, but I do believe that maybe it's time to go in a different direction for the Phillies. And it was nice to have Mackanin as the manager, but I think they can look beyond him now and know that they're going to need somebody else to to take the reins of this team to make it successful. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this edition of Phillies Talk. It's Phillies Talk Podcast, the longest running independent podcast talking all about the Philadelphia Phillies. And stay with us all off season. Going to have some nice interviews with some authors, some insiders from the Phillies. Hope to get a couple lined up in the next couple weeks. Give me some time to get a good couple shows going for you. So please stay subscribed. Let your friends know about the podcast. I'd love to have more listeners checking out the show. Subscribe on iTunes. And, of course, check out the blog at fightingphillies.com. I'll talk to you again on the next edition of Phillies Talk Podcast, everyone.